All right. We're live on a Wednesday night here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, live for this week's Panther-Lair Show. And we will not be joined by Jim tonight. I should probably wait to say this until a few more people are tuning in, but the internet in Johnstown is not doing great, or at least Jim's internet provider, whoever that might be, Flood City Internet. I can only assume that's what it's called, is Flood City Internet. But Jim's internet provider is not working, so he is living exclusively that 5G life, no Wi-Fi life, and so not going to make it for this week's live show. So if you're curious about that, why it's just me talking to you for an hour, that's why. Jim is unavailable, and we'll certainly miss him as I try and get my chair adjusted and get right with the microphone. I'm going to be on the whole screen tonight. Typically, we have, the half and half look with me on one side and Jim on the other, but we are going to be all me all the time. It's like an extended hour-long episode of the Morning Pit. But the difference here, of course, is that you can contribute and be part of the conversation right there on the side. And put your comments and questions in there. We'll read those. We'll answer as many as we can. We'll react. We'll have a little back and forth here on a Wednesday night. Jim, with the internet out, obviously we hope he gets that taken care of. He's making do and contributing content and the message boards and everything at Panther-Lair.com. But obviously there's a lot of people in Western Pennsylvania who don't have power. I'm guessing those of you who don't have power probably aren't watching this right now. You probably don't have internet, and you're probably trying to save your phone battery life. We wish the best for you. I know it's tough. I haven't seen anything like this in a long time, that there's been this many people kind of stuck, and it looks like it's not going to be coming back anytime soon, at least for the vast majority of people. And so, all our best to everyone. I mean, there's people in my neighborhood. Like we're lucky here in the Panther-Lair offices that we still have power and everything's good here. But it's like the houses next door, across the street, one block up, they don't have it. And so it's kind of crazy how it's picking spots, but there's a lot of people. I think, what did I see? 250,000 people don't have power in Western Pennsylvania right now with Duquesne Light. So, hopefully that gets resolved soon. I would offer space in our freezer to store your perishables, but we're already helping out the neighbors, so we don't have a lot of room left there. But if you don't have power, we hope you get it back soon. Lots to talk about here tonight on the Panther-Lair Show. Recruiting stuff, transfer stuff, NFL draft stuff, whatever you want to talk about. And there's actually a comment that I want to get to right off the bat. We will in a second here. And it's, we have our conversation. We have our back and forth here on the Panther-Lair Show every Wednesday night. It's live. And I always look forward to it. It's fun. And again, you guys get in the chat screen over there, post your comments and your questions about anything going on in the world of Pitt sports, and we'll answer and react to them as much as we can, or as many of them as we can throughout the night. It's like a bit of a back and forth. It's like a call-in show, is what I always say. The Morning Pit is more of like a talk show where I just kind of talk and you listen. These live shows, when we do either the post-game shows or the live streams on Wednesday night, they're like a call-in show. And so you're sounding off and we're giving voice to the fan. So that's, jump in the chat screen. You got something you want to talk about? We'll go wherever the conversation takes us. I did want to bring this up. Swim Boyd said right off the bat, just recently found out that Pitt Panther John Malecki has a pretty successful YouTube channel. It's cool to see a former Pitt player find success after their football career. Yeah, I knew John Malecki was doing woodworking. Remember, John Malecki graduated from Franklin Regional in 2006, I want to say. It was really the first recruiting class I ever covered, like, professionally. And he graduated from Franklin Regional in 2006, went to Pitt, played 4 years, moved, started as defensive tackle, moved to offense, and just was really good. A really good player. He played for a little bit in the NFL, I think, with the Steelers. And I knew he had been doing some woodworking stuff, and it seemed pretty cool. But then, after Swim Boyd mentioned that, I went over to his YouTube channel. And yeah, he's got 1.4 million subscribers. The YouTube channel is John_Malecki, Malecki, John_Malecki. He's got a website, johnmalecki.com. He's got 1.4 million subscribers. He put up a video 4 days ago that he's building a SpongeBob table for real fish and it already has 344,000 videos. He put up a video 3 months ago. Looks like he's like kind of sporadic, varying amounts of time between when he puts up new videos. But he put up a video 3 months ago where he built a quote luxury $20,000 doghouse. It's got 1.2 million views. He put up a video 2 months ago where he built 2 cutting boards. It says AI versus man. It's got 1.3 million views. So John Malecki is doing well. Making YouTube videos. He built a real Game of Thrones table from House of the Dragon, 1.2 million views. Yeah, he's doing well. I have some sense of the YouTube numbers and what those numbers kind of look like and what kind of revenue they'll generate. And John Malecki's doing okay for himself off these YouTube videos that he's producing. So good for him. He was a good dude. And we don't usually swear on these videos, but he kicked a lot of ass in high school. You watch his high school video, if you can find it. It's a little bit hard to find. I tried to poke around a little bit earlier because our good friend, the Whippeal Insider, tweeted something about how Kalik Hudson at McKeesport in 2016 class had some of the best highlight film he's ever seen on both sides of the ball. And so I started thinking about who are some of the best Whippeal highlight films I've seen. And, Tyler Boyd, Jordan Whitehead, Dorn Dickerson. In terms of playing both ways, honestly, even though he was a lineman, John Malecki might be right up there at the top of the list. Honestly, it's hard to find like highlight film from guys, 20 years ago. Huddle wasn't really all that prominent back then. YouTube wasn't really a thing back then. And, we used to drive around and go to high schools, and the high school coaches would give us videotapes, or some of the more advanced guys would give us DVDs of the highlights, of guys' highlight films, and we would take it and then we would send it into the headquarters, and they would get it online, and then we would have highlight film. Eventually we got to a point where coaches could not email, but actually mail us the videotapes or DVDs. So it became far more convenient once you got Huddle, and you could just have a link, and players and coaches could upload their videos and then send the link out to anybody who wanted. I often think actually that's one of the reasons recruiting has changed so much in the last 15 years, 10 years. I think Huddle, HUDL, if you don't know about it, Huddle.com, it's a place for recruits to post their highlight films. And rather than having to send video out to college coaches all over the country, or rather than having to have college coaches come to your school and get the video from your head coach and all that stuff, like all you have to do is just email a link. And then when you added Twitter, which made communication even easier to pull off, you just had to send a direct message. You just had to put the link to your Huddle video in your Twitter bio. And now a kid from, Western Pennsylvania, a kid from Beaver County or someplace could get recruited by Arizona State because everybody can find their stuff. Like, wow, why is this kid from Aliquippa going to Texas A&M? Where did that come from? Well, because it's really easy. The world is much smaller than it used to be. There was no way like a coach from Arizona State was going to get film of a kid from Beaver County. I mean, I'm just picking like random examples. Although you go back to 2011, I think, I was going to say some guys went to Arizona State, but I think that was the Todd Graham connection. They had a little bit of it built in there. But what I'm talking about, like just broad geographic reach became a lot easier to find out about guys on the other side of the country. It became a lot easier to make yourself known to coaches on the other side of the country when you could just send them a link. You could put a link in your bio, or you could send a link in a DM on Twitter. And now coaches from all over the country know about you. Whereas back in 2006, you were a really special player if coaches all over the country knew about you. Like Dorn Dickerson had offers from USC and stuff like that because he was just that good, and his film got out and it got spread and the coaches found out about it. Whereas John Malecki, I think he had good offers. It wasn't exactly like it was, it wasn't like a Dorn Dickerson level of offer sheet. But also the thing is too, we would then put their highlight films on the internet, and college coaches would find it, so they'd start reaching out. But like a lot of these guys didn't really have offers from across the country because they, you just didn't have that ease of reach and ease of contact and ease of communication that you do now. So long way of saying I would like to find John Malecki's high school highlight film, because he was awesome at Franklin Regional. He really was. He was really good at Pitt too. But he dominated at Franklin Regional on both sides of the ball. He played both sides of the ball, and he was just an unstoppable force. He led them to they won the Whitfield. I forget if they won a state championship that year as well. But he was like the rare lineman who really did lead his team to a championship. Usually you got to have those skill guys, and they had good players. They had skill players. I think they had a decent quarterback and everything like that. But like, it was really about John Malecki. John Malecki was a state or a Whitfield championship winning lineman. He was just that good. All right, let's jump into comments and questions, see what you guys are talking about here. Brock01 says, how many players do you think the basketball team is likely to add? Well, we talked about a little bit today on today's Morning Pit. We talked about where the roster is right now. They're currently projected to have 12 scholarship players. The 4 returning guys, Brandon Cummings, Cameron Corrin, Papa Conti, who returned from the transfer portal. I think since our last live show, since last Wednesday, Papa Conti decided to come back. So he's back. Amni Najai is back. And then they have the 4 transfers coming in: Deshaun Jackson and Noyes Andrositis from Iowa State, DeMarco Minor from Oregon State, and Barry Dunny Jr. from South Alabama. And then they had the 2 high school kids, Amari Witherspoon, and the most recent commit, Kieran Mullen, who committed on Monday, I want to say. Kid originally from Canada. He's playing at St. Thomas More in Connecticut. He's a big 7-foot center, but a developmental guy. Somebody who's not going to be ready to play as a freshman. I don't think he's going to be counted on to play as a freshman. I don't think he's going to be expected to play as a freshman. I don't think he is going to be expecting to play as a freshman. He's coming in expecting to redshirt. Now, he told us that he doesn't think that's 100%, but that's sort of the plan right now. And it's understandable when you have, Corrin and Conti back. You have Jackson coming in as a transfer. Even if Corrin doesn't play center exclusively, he'll still be, he'll still get minutes there. So you shouldn't need the freshman to play like Brandon Cummings played last year. You know what I mean? Or like Jalen Lowe and Bub Carrington played 2 years ago. Like, you shouldn't need freshmen to contribute in that way. Or the year before that with the Diaz Graham twins and Federico. You shouldn't need a freshman like Kieran Mullen at that position to play, because they should have enough depth. So that's 12 scholarship players, or excuse me, 10. That's 10 scholarships accounted for right there. Now, under the current rules, the old rules, you could have 13 scholarship players on the roster. So by that rule, by the old rule, which is still the current rule, they could get 3 more players, 3 more scholarship players. Now, if the House settlement is approved and they move forward with roster limits like they're talking about, then it would move up to a total of 15 players on the roster, all of which could be on scholarship. So in theory, you could add 5 more scholarship players total on top of the 10 that they've already got accounted for if those new roster limits are put into place. We'll see what happens with that. We'll see if the new roster limits change. We'll see if the scholarship limits change. We'll see if they grandfather in players who were already on the roster, so you don't have to cut a bunch of guys, because Pitt's got a handful of walk-ons, 2 or 3, I think. That if you decided to go to 15 scholarship players, you'd have to dump some of those guys. Even if you decide to go to 13 scholarship players and the roster limit is 15, you'd have to make some cuts there among the walk-ons. So, long way of not answering your question. How many players do I think they're likely to add? I think we'll see them add 2 more scholarship guys who are expected to play this year, and potentially 1 more. There's another freshman that they're after, and there's a question about it. We'll get to that in a second. Another developmental guy that they could add that probably wouldn't be expecting to play this year. And I talked a lot about him, about Braden Hawthorne. That's his name. I talked a lot about him this morning on the Morning Pit, and obviously talked about Kieran Mullen on the Morning Pit as well. So, but I mean, I think what they still need, I think, a power forward, and I think they need a shooting guard, like who can play this year. A power forward and a shooting guard. A 2 and a 4 in the parlance of our times. And I think there's different options that are out there. There's different players they've been linked to. There's some guys that they're, considering, et cetera, all the different ways you want to say it, but they haven't landed them yet. I think they need a power forward. Excuse me. Because I just don't think it's a viable option to go into the season with Cam Corrin as your number 1-4. I don't think he can be Cam Foreign this year. Is that going to catch on? I said that like in passing this morning. I don't think it's going to catch on, but maybe it will. I just don't think you can go into this season with that as the plan. And likewise, I could be convinced that Brandon Cummings should start at the 2. I could be convinced of that. I could also be convinced that if they can find a veteran, talented 3-point shooter and Cummings can work off the bench, that I could be convinced that's a good option as well. I don't want to cut off Brandon Cummings' path to the court, but I also would not want to eliminate the possibility of getting a veteran shooter who can come in and make a lot of threes, which is ultimately what they need. And they probably need that even more than they need a 4, but I think they need both a lot. So how many players are they likely to add? I would say 2 ready to play guys who can come in and get on the court right away. Brock says, I also saw a tweet that Pitt is showing interest in a D2 receiver from Clarion. Yeah, I saw this in passing. I didn't get a chance to look into this quite as deeply as I would like. Trayvon Tate is his name. He played at Clarion. I think he's originally from Erie. Looks like he caught 65 passes for 1,100 yards and 5 touchdowns. He was an All-American honorable mention, All-Conference first-team player. Reading these things straight out of his Twitter bio, so you're not allowed to post falsehoods. But he's Pitt, Stanford, Arkansas State, Kent State also involved there. Those are some of the teams kind of looking at him. I go back and forth about what they need as far as a receiver. Even when they were in pursuit of Hakeem Williams, who ended up committing to Colorado yesterday maybe. I think it was yesterday. I looked at that as a luxury ad. I'm not totally sold on their receiver room, but I also don't know, unless you have a legit, proven, obvious option. I don't know if there's a major need at receiver. I think you could get better because, like I say, I'm not entirely sold on this receiving core, but it just doesn't feel like they're going to. I don't think Pitt is in a position on a number of levels to go get a guy, a transfer at wide receiver who, when they get him, we're all going to sit back and say, holy crap, that guy is going to take the top off this offense. That guy is going to be the missing piece that this offense needed. I just don't see that happening. I don't see the NIL resources available. I don't know if I necessarily see this offense commanding that kind of attention. Our guy Steven Gertz would call it gravity. I don't know. I don't see this offense having that kind of gravitational pull on a big time wide receiver. I think they're going to need to prove it. They're going to need to put out some superstar performances at the wide receiver position before they're really going to get that next level of guy coming in. And I think there's a potential to do it. Kenny Johnson, the freshmen look impressive. Blue Hicks and Deuce Spann, the transfers have a chance. They're guys that should be able to make plays. But I wouldn't be surprised if this passing game, if it's good, ends up being the whole more than the sum of its parts. And so, you want to go get a transfer from Clarion? Okay. Sure. If you feel like he's a good fit, if he's got the speed, can run the routes well and all that stuff, great. Go do it. But I just don't know if I see them really getting somebody who moves the needle when they commit. Now, like some of the transfers they've already gotten, Deuce Spann and Blue Hicks, sure, they could end up being awesome. You know what I mean? Raphael Williams and Sincere Lee last year, they could have huge years this year. I just don't know if any of those guys, Blue Hicks or Deuce Spann or Andy Jean, when he was here, I don't know if any of them really jump out at you. So, we'll see. see what happens with those guys. But, if they feel like the Clarion kid's a good fit, go for it. Speaking of receivers, Josh Newark wants to know, is Kenny Johnson still a Panther? He is still a Panther. And it sounds like they got that situation resolved. Obviously, we haven't seen the official tweet from Alliance 412 or from Kenny himself. But look, there was a very real chance of him leaving for the transfer portal. I think he had a good, from what we've been told, there were offers on the table. There were offers on the table, and he had to make a decision about what offer he wanted to take. From what we've been told, he decided to take Pitt's offer. We put this on the message boards the other day, but it sounds like he's sticking with Pitt. And that obviously is that is good for Pitt's receiver room. Kenny Johnson still has a lot to prove. He's got a lot to show. I don't think he has even scraped the surface. I don't think he's even come close to his potential yet. I think he can be really good. I don't know if he's a Biletnikoff winner, but I think he can have a big seasons. I think he can do really well and play well in this offense. But he hasn't done it yet. He hasn't had that big breakout year. And now he's a junior. Now he's in his third year. So that breakout season needs to come. And it needs to happen this year. He needs to be the number one wide receiver for this team in 2025. He needs to play like it. He needs to get targeted like it. And he needs to put up the numbers. But to answer your question, yes, he's still a Panther. Going to the basketball side, Joey Dealey says it would be really good get if we could land Braden Hawthorne, but he has lots of interest from Duke and Kentucky, West Virginia, Virginia Tech. He has a lot of upside. Yeah, Braden Hawthorne was the former West Virginia commit from Huntington Prep. He decommitted after the coaching change there. He has visited Kentucky and Virginia Tech. West Virginia is still working on him. Took an official visit to Pitt earlier this week. He's going to visit Duke, I think, this weekend. So some stiff competition. And Hawthorne is a little bit like Kieran Mullen, who I talked about a little bit earlier, who did commit to Pitt on Monday. And I talked about both of these guys on the Morning Pit today. That these guys are sort of similar in that they both seem to be developmental prospects. Not exactly in the same ways. I think they're both at different stages in their individual developments, but they both seem to be developmental prospects. Mullen is a 7-foot center who, still needs to develop on the defensive end, but, it has some interesting natural tools. Hawthorne is a 6'8" forward who's got reportedly a 7'3" wingspan, can shoot a little bit, and is just sort of a really intriguing guy for his size, but he's also, it seems like he's got a lot of growing to do. He's got to grow into his body. He's got to grow into his skills and skill set. And it's going to take some college coaching to get there. It seems like with both guys, Mullen himself has said that, there's talk of redshirting this first year. When Hawthorne was committed to West Virginia, he said he was, the talk there was that he was planning to redshirt his first year in Morgantown. So these are long-term potential guys, developmental guys that you're looking to bring along, and you hope that they stick, and ideally, I think if you're honest about it at this stage of the process, that if you talk to these guys and you tell them what you're thinking and tell them what you're planning and how you see them being used and how they're not going to play as freshmen, they're going to redshirt and all that stuff. Ideally, if they go into it with that mentality and that understanding, then maybe you're more likely to hold on to them and actually be able to teach them and grow them and develop them over the course of 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years, ideally. But the ideal situations rarely pan out these days, it seems. Joey Dealey also asked, who's the international prospect that we're going after that you mentioned on one of your videos? Yeah, we've been talking about him for a while. He's an Australian kid, Roman Sialepa, rugby player, big, rugged, power forward prospect, could play the 4. He would probably be the ideal guy for Pitt to land at that power forward spot. We just have to see if it's going to happen. And it's a little bit tough getting that communication around the world. But we're seeing what we can find out and keeping an eye on that situation. So that's the guy. That's, I think, who they would like to have come in and start at the 4, and I think if they were to get him to commit, that would fill that spot and kind of fill it nicely. And you'd really just need to focus on getting that shooting guard. But it's, we'll just see what's happening. We're sort of keeping an eye on things, waiting for something to develop. Oh, I guess I didn't really answer this. Owen Boris says, what are Pitt's chances with Braden Hawthorne? It seems like he'd be a good ad. Yeah, we talked about Hawthorne. It's a question of what are Pitt's chances. I mean, you're going up against Duke and Kentucky. They both like this guy as well. And, I think Duke is going after Hawthorne and maybe one other guy who might be more of a developmental prospect. Seems like maybe whoever they take first could be who they get. And so I think they have Hawthorne coming in for a visit first. So maybe he's a bit of the priority there. But look, you're going up against great programs in Duke and Kentucky. You're going up against good, good situations with West Virginia, Virginia Tech. I mean, I don't know what Pitt's chances are. I know he really liked his official visit, and it helps that they got him on campus and they were able to show him around and do all of that. But I don't know. I don't have a great read on that situation. Basketball can be a tough one to piece together anyway. But when you're going up against Duke and Kentucky, it's going to be tough. Timothy Smith says, any update on the hiring of the basketball GM Jay Kuntz? Yeah, that was an interesting day or two there. What was that? A week ago, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, where it was reported that Pitt hired a general manager, Jay Kuntz, a guy who went to West Virginia. Was part of some of those great battles against Pitt in the Big East back in the mid 2000s. He's been the general manager there. I think he first started with the program back around the time Bob Huggins was hired. So he's been around for a long time. It got reported that he was hired as Pitt's general manager, and then it kind of got unreported. I don't really know if you can unreport something like that. Look, I think there's a bit of a hiring freeze going on for Pitt. I don't think they can really make any official hirings until, probably sometime in the summer. So I think everything's sort of standing pat as far as that goes and just kind of sitting back and waiting for time to pass. I still think it's going to happen. I think he'll hit the ground running as soon as he can, but that's about that, and we'll see what develops. Let's see. Dave Yark says Kuntz would be a fairly significant staff addition, but I'm guessing there'll be no subtractions as part of the staff changes for 25-26, and that disappoints, right? Yeah, it looks like they're not changing any coaching staff, making any changes to the coaching staff. It looks like everybody's coming back for year 8 now, I guess it is. I don't know what to make of it. I mean, I think if you're Jeff Capel, you're steering the ship. I feel like, and I could be wrong, I've never been in the coaches meeting rooms for any of these programs, football or basketball, but I feel like there's a little bit, you're going to create less of an impact by changing coaches on a basketball staff, unless you're looking for recruiting additions or recruiting connections and things like that with the coaches that you're hiring. But for the most part, you kind of play the way the head coach wants you to play. Guys could, some coaches develop some positions better than others, but I don't feel like it's like football where, there's not really that equivalent of like the offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, play caller. It's kind of just the head coach in basketball with input, of course, in game planning work and scout and all that stuff. But, in football, you have guys calling the plays. We're going to run here. We're going to pass. We're going to blitz. We're going to drop into coverage. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. It's not really the same. And so I just don't know if changing the basketball staff would be the shakeup that a lot of fans want it to be. You know what I think? I think Pitt basketball fans want Jeff Capel to make changes to his staff because that, in the eyes of Pitt basketball fans, would be an acknowledgement that Capel is unhappy with the results thus far. An acknowledgement that Capel looks at the situation and says, we should be better than we are. We should have won more than we did. And we should have made the tournament more often than we did. And I'm going to fire coaches and hire new coaches because I'm really mad about this, and I feel like we should be better. I think that's what fans want. And I understand that it feels a little bit like a pound of flesh, but I mean, I get it. Like, you want some outward signs that Jeff Capel is just as disgusted by this as you are. And I understand that, and there aren't many ways to make those outward signs to show desperation, to show how much you want to make a change or how much you want to improve. But firing some coaches, firing your brother would certainly do it. And I think it would buy some goodwill. Here's the thing though, Dave, and I don't know if you would agree with this or not. I don't really think goodwill matters. Like, I don't think you're going to sell any more season tickets if you fire your brother. I like, even if you do, it's got to be a negligible amount of people who are going to say, you know what? I wasn't going to re-up this year. I wasn't going to go through this whole reseeding process and all that stuff. But he fired his brother. You son of a gun, I'm in. Like, I just don't know. I don't like, the only thing that's going to build goodwill with the fans, that's going to get people back in the Peterson Event Center, is winning basketball, and not just going to the tournament one time in 9 years, but going consistently. It didn't get built overnight. Back in the 2000s, it happened, but it had been building, and it continued being built over the course of 5, 6 years, 10 years. And that's what has to happen here. It's got to be a build, and then the success has to be sustained. And then people will come back, because people showed in this town 20 years ago that they love good basketball. They love winning basketball. I mean, we're a town of front runners anyway. We'll go anywhere where somebody is winning, unless it's soccer or women's basketball. But if you can go out and win, the fans will come. And I don't think staff changes will do anything other than just, like I said, be a pound of flesh that probably won't sell any tickets. So, yeah, no coaching changes, no staff changes, just adding the general manager, presumably at some point in the future, and that'll be it. Let's see. Swin Boyd says, seems like it could really work out for some freshmen to come in, get experience in a system, and when talent transfers out, have a leg up on the next year's roster. If you're talking about guys like redshirting, I agree, and probably anyone over the age of 30 agrees that it could be useful and valuable, maybe the age of 40. It could be useful and valuable to get experience, and then you're ready to go when other players transfer out or they run out of eligibility, but it's just not that way anymore. Basketball never really had, it was never huge for redshirts the way football is. Football always had more players who redshirted and lasted a full 5 years and all that stuff. Far more than basketball. And I think it's even less now. I think there are even fewer guys you're going to find who are willing to do that, who want to do that, who want to be in that situation, who are willing to say, you know what? I've been a star player and a starter for my team all my life, but I'm going to come to college and I'm going to sit and I'm going to learn and I'm going to practice and I'm going to be the practice dummy. But this is what my role is going to be. And in year 2, I'll see if I can get on the court. There just aren't many guys that are looking at things that way. There aren't many guys that are thinking that way. And it's probably even less than it was before because there are so many. They've really cleared out the hurdles and obstacles to keep you from leaving. It's very easy to go now. It's very easy to transfer and go to another school and find somewhere to play, and not have to do that, not have to sit out. And so it's unique that Pitt potentially could sign 2 of these guys. And I said this on the Morning Pitt this morning. Dave Yark talks about they should making coaching changes. And I think part of that would be fans want to see that Jeff Capel feels a sense of desperation. Well, recruiting 2 high school kids, 2 guys to come in as freshmen, with the intention of redshirting them, that's not exactly speaking to desperation either. That's planning for the future. That's planning for the long term. That's planning for not just 2025, 26, but 26, 27, 27, 28, and 28, 29. That's planning for down the road, which long-term planning is also not exactly a sign of desperation. That's not what people who are coaching for their jobs would typically do. And yet here they are. They took Kieran Mullen and they're trying to get Braden Hawthorne. So it's an interesting situation all around. It's interesting all around to recruit guys with the intention of redshirting them when we're in 2025. It's interesting to have Jeff Capel and his staff in their current positions taking that kind of long view of things and recruiting to it. It's just interesting. And it's interesting to have Mullen and potentially Hawthorne being open to the idea. So interesting stuff. Doug Meckler wants to know, did you know Jorge Diaz Graham is committed to Oregon State? Yeah, I did. Let's see. Just kidding. I think that's interesting. I guess we have to think about the fact, it's interesting because Guillermo Diaz Graham is going to San Francisco. And I think on first blush, we all still think of Oregon State being in the Pac-12 and San Francisco being in the whatever they were in, West Coast Conference or something like that. But the reality is they're in the same conference now. And the reality is San Francisco was better than Oregon State last year. So the reality is it looks like Jorge leveled up and Guillermo leveled down. I'm not so sure they're at that far of different levels from each other. From the time those two went into the transfer portal, I think we talked about how it was probably that they probably wouldn't go together, that they each were going to have to look for their own, each going to have to look for their own best fit and best situation to get themselves on the court, to give themselves an opportunity to play, to showcase their talents and potentially build their resume as a pro prospect. And so I thought that would probably happen at different schools, that they probably wouldn't end up playing together. And that's the case. So that part came to fruition. I thought there'd be a pretty clear distinction in who went higher level and who went lower level, not just in, we sit back and say, well, San Francisco versus Oregon State, San Francisco is a better program right now, but more like very clearly, like a high major for Guillermo and a mid major, low major for Jorge. And that's not really what happened. You got them going to programs that at least right now are kind of on equal footing. I'm going to be fascinated to see what those guys do. I mean, the number one point of interest is, Amsal Delilich and seeing what he does at DePaul. But the Diaz Graham twins at San Francisco and Oregon State, I am really, really interested to see what they do next season. I think they can be really good. I mean, we've talked about this a million times. We think they're, we think they're very talented players and they've got the skills and the shooting and all of that, but, maybe just not used to the best of their abilities this past season at Pitt. So if they're going to new schools and they're picking these schools and, Guillermo's specifically going to San Francisco and Jorge is specifically going to Oregon State, you would think they're going to those schools because they're going to be used the best way possible, which is interesting. I want to see if they really do end up in a good situation. I want to see, in an ideal situation, I want to see what that actually looks like and how they do. Our good friend, Bobby, I see him every year in March because I take part in this March Madness fantasy draft where you draft about 8 players and you accumulate points throughout the course of the NCAA tournament until your guys are eliminated and everything. And the league is growing. I feel like I forget how many we have now, 16 players or something like that. But these are all guys that, with maybe one or two exceptions, I only see them at the draft each year on the Monday after selection Sunday. Like, it's the only time I see these guys, once a year. And Bobby is one guy who's there. He's actually we were talking about John Malecki earlier. Our friend Bobby's a Franklin regional guy too, actually. But he's classic because anytime somebody drafts a player from a team out west, he always knows about him because the dude stays up all night watching West Coast basketball. So this is going to be the guy who we might have to have him on as a guest just to tell us, mid-season in January, February or something, just to tell us how Guillermo and Jorge are doing, because he'll inevitably have watched them like a half dozen times each. So we'll have to get our friend Bobby, the West Coast basketball expert, on in January, February, because he knows his stuff. But, Guillermo and Jorge, wish him the best. They were always great kids, always great to deal with, always interesting, always funny, always smart, and always good basketball players. And so, look forward to seeing what their careers become down the road. Adam Vinchik wants to know, what other positions is the Pitt football team looking at from the transfer portal? That's an interesting question. We've seen them sort of loosely connected with the running back. We saw them loosely connected with some defensive tackles. I think when they came into the spring portal window, and obviously they've landed a tight end, a cornerback, and a quarterback. When they came into the spring portal window, I would have said, and I think a few sources agreed with me, that tight end was probably the biggest need in the transfer portal. That they really needed to get a tight end who could come in and play, numbers wise. They needed it. I think, they needed it even before Jake Renda went into the transfer portal. And then Renda going left them with 2 upperclassmen and 1 true freshman. And so they needed to add another guy. And they got Justin Holmes from Marshall, who seems to fit in as a blocker and a guy who can help them that way. I would not have pegged cornerback as a need, at least for the 2025 season, but with the unfortunate, really tragic passing of Mason Alexander, I hate to even like bring it up because it feels so callous to talk about in terms of like depth or numbers. We're talking about a young man's life that was lost, and it's terribly sad. But on kind of the cold, hard data side of it, you needed to replace the numbers on the roster. And so they went and got a redshirt freshman cornerback who, effectively has the same eligibility, except he's got 1 year of college football under his belt. Didn't play much at North Carolina. Only got on the field for a couple of games at special teams, but he's seen what a college football program is like and how it operates and what you have to do and the level of commitment necessary and all those things. So, that sort of made sense. Cole Gonzalez as a transfer became sort of a necessity when Julian Duggar went into the transfer portal. And I think even though those two things were kind of happening at the same time, and maybe Cade Bell would have liked to have added Gonzalez, even if Duggar stayed, I think Gonzalez became a priority when the coaches started to get the sense that Duggar was going to leave. And we haven't really talked about this tonight. Obviously, I had a long morning pit about it on Monday. But that was some of the other news out of the weekend, that Julian Duggar went into the transfer portal. Cole Gonzalez committed to Pitt from the portal. Gonzalez coming to Pitt from Oklahoma, but more relevantly, coming to Pitt from Western Carolina, where he played for Cade Bell for 2 years, put up some pretty good numbers in those 2 seasons, and he comes in with a working knowledge of the offense, at least as it existed 2 years ago at Western Carolina. Nice fit. Duggar, disappointing to see him go. Came in as something of a project, but with a really high ceiling, really talented thrower, really talented runner, really talented football player. I've been high on him for a long time. If you have any doubts about that, you can go back to the summer of 2023, I think it was, where as Pitt's quarterback prospects were sort of fading off the board. They miss on this guy, or they lose that guy, or this guy seems like he's drifting away. It became sort of evident that a really good option for Pitt was right here in the Whippeal, and it was right there at Penn Hills with Julian Duggar. And I had seen Duggar at multiple camps, probably 3 camps at that point, seen a handful of his games, either watching the video, the highlights online, or watching videos of the games, whatever it might be. So I'd seen a decent amount of him, and I was really high on him. I thought he had a chance to be really good. And he got to Pitt, and he looked interesting and promising. Never played until the bowl game, and we could have a whole separate conversation about that. But looked good. Looked good enough that I think I would have trusted him to be the number 2 quarterback, even if Mason Hunchel ultimately passed him in spring camp, which is a whole other, tentacle of this discussion. But looked good enough. I think he could have been the number 2 quarterback this season. But, either because he felt like Heidschel had passed him, or that he wasn't going to get the opportunity, or whatever it is, Duggar and the people around him decided to go into the transfer portal. We'll see where he ends up. Either way, kind of wish him luck. Hope he does well. I always like Julian. Always got along with him. Talked to him a handful of times over the years, recruiting and at Pitt, and I think he's going to do well. I think he's a really talented player. Back to Adam's question, what positions is Pitt looking at? Well, they've added 3 transfers so far this spring. Again, the tight end, the quarterback, and the cornerback. I would say as far as needs, I'm still not convinced that running back is a need, but I could understand if the coaches viewed it as such. I think they've got the numbers in the room that they're not desperate, but if they wanted to go add another veteran to work with Desmond Reed and Juelz Goff and the freshman, I could totally understand it. And I wouldn't really, I wouldn't have too much of an issue with it. I can understand why that room might give you some pause when, you're looking at 6 scholarship backs. One is Derek Davis, and who knows when he's going to be back. He had a pretty serious knee injury at the end of the regular season last year. One is Desmond Reed, who's awesome. He's an All-American. And then the other, 4 are Juelz Goff, a redshirt freshman with just like a handful of carries last year, and then 3 true freshmen. One of which, Jakarian Turner, enrolled in January, and the other 2 guys, Saquon Smith and Jalen Brown, won't get here until June. So you've got 6 scholarship backs, but 3 have never played in college before. One's played minimally, and one will never be, one will not be available for quite some time, probably into the season. So the numbers are good, but then on closer inspection, they're not quite as good. So it's one of those kind of deals. So I can understand if they wanted to get another running back. I think you could always use more linemen on either side of the ball, no matter how good your depth is and how good your starting 5 or 4 is. You could always use more, so you kick the tires there. But I really think it's about finding best available players. I don't think there are glaring needs right now, outside of a few of those things that I mentioned. I don't think there are glaring needs right now, so you can be a little selective. And I think they still have less than 85 scholarships accounted for 2025. And again, that's another situation where maybe the House settlement renders that number moot. Maybe the House settlement gives a whole new number, whatever it might be. They're not going to be in any danger of running out of scholarships. They've got space to fill. It's just, what do they decide to do with it? I think they can get some best available players and take that approach, the best available player, if, they can find the right guy and they can land him. But I don't know if there's a giant need right now. All right, let's see. Vincent Scales says, you mentioned women's basketball. Have you noticed the team Tori Verdi is putting together? Yeah, it's pretty, it's impressive. I got to say, I can't say that I followed it as closely as, obviously as we follow like the men's basketball, but it certainly looks good. I mean, he's adding 5-star prospects, and it seems like he's doing well in the transfer portal. It's interesting. I'm distracted for a second here because Milo says, "Did you see Pitt basketball's post on Instagram? Is Damian Dunn coming back?" I'm trying to see here. I don't know if this is a highlight video of Damian Dunn. And it's a sizzle reel, or if I can't see how he would come back. I think he would be out of eligibility. But I mean, I'm watching this video here that they posted. You can see. I don't know. I would assume this doesn't mean he's coming back. You can't assume anything these days. But I guess we will try to see what we can find out along the way. Pitt basketball. Yeah, I don't have any real indication of what that means. I know that was riveting for you guys to watch as I sat here and watched it, but I don't know. Let's see what we can find out on that front. Anyway, I don't need to look at the Pitt basketball Instagram. We'll try and figure that out after we get done here. I can do this later. Let's see. L Turk asks, what's the deal with Ishmael Leggett and these older guys putting their names in the transfer portal? So I think what that's about, and you're seeing it across the country, these guys who seemingly are out of eligibility, what that's about is, there's a lot of uncertainty about who's actually out of eligibility, who could have eligibility remaining, who could get extra eligibility, who seemingly is out of eligibility but could get another year. There's a lot that's kind of up in the air there. And I think what has happened and what Ishmael Leggett did and a number of other players who seem to be out of eligibility, why they put their names in the transfer portal is sort of a little bit of insurance that, okay, maybe they'll say, no, I don't get an extra year of eligibility. Okay, fine. I was planning to go try and play in the pros anyway. But maybe they'll say yes. And if they say yes, then I might go back to college, depending on what kind of NIL deals I can get. But the thing is, if I'm going to do that, and I'm speaking from Ishmael Leggett's perspective here. I don't mean to speak for him, but I'm speaking from the perspective of anybody who did this, who went into the transfer portal even though they're out of eligibility. You look at it and you say, okay, if I get that extra year and I decide to go back, or I want to find out what kind of NIL deals I have, I need to be in the portal because the portal window closed last week, right? Last Tuesday, I think it was, a week ago yesterday. I need to be in the portal in order to have that contact with other schools. And so if I'm going to come back to college, I want to see where I can get the best deal. Maybe I want to go back to Pitt. Maybe I'll come back to Pitt. That would fill that shooting guard role that we're talking about. Although I don't know. I think they need a better shooter than Ishmael Leggett, but that's neither here nor there. But if Ishmael Leggett's looking at it and he's saying, okay, maybe I'll come back to Pitt. Maybe I'll go somewhere else. I at least want to leave the door open as a possibility, to have the opportunity out there to go somewhere else, or even just to entertain other offers and have some leverage to try and get a better deal out of Pitt. But if I don't put my name in the transfer portal before the window closes, I don't have any of that. Like my only option, if I get an extra year of eligibility, is to go back to Pitt, which is fine, which might be exactly what he wants to do anyway. But he's giving himself an out, and he's giving himself not even an out, actually. He's just making sure all the options, or as many options, are available to him as possible. And, also sort of creating some, a little bit of leverage, that if he has to go back to the negotiating table with Pitt, he can have some other offers to compare them to. So I think that's what it is. Chances are these guys won't get a year. They won't get that extra year of eligibility. I'm kind of thinking most of them won't get that extra year of eligibility. We'll see. But I think that's what it's all about. I think that's what they're trying to do. So, it's a smart move. It's a business move. It's a business decision, and probably, it's a smart one. And like when I first saw that, I had the same reaction. I was like, what the heck? What's going on here? Why are these guys, why are they doing this? What's the point? And then it got kind of explained to me like that. And I was like, actually, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense that they would, give themselves that opportunity, or make sure those options are in front of them. Let's see what else is going on. Just generally where things are right now. Pitt basketball staff is they're actually out scouting high school recruits a lot this week and last week. In addition to keeping an eye on guys in the transfer portal, they're hosting recruits on visits. A lot of work with high school kids. We're all focused on the transfer portal and the guys who are going to help in, the fall in this coming season. But the Pitt coaching staff is still working to build a roster beyond 2025-26. And so they're doing a lot of that. For the football staff, they're on the road too. I don't think head coaches can go on the road right now. It's all assistant coaches going out and visiting recruits, but they're going to the recruits' high schools and going to the recruits' homes and doing in-home visits and evaluations and all these different things. Really, it's all a lead up to June when they get to the official visits. Obviously, tomorrow's May 1st, so you're really in that last month before the official visits, and then that's when the action really kicks in. Would be surprised if it gets a commitment or two in May. It seems to be happening a little bit more over the last few years, but June is when it's really going to jump off, and it always does. bring in a bunch of guys for official visits, and they will get a ton of commitments because that's what June is. So we are, when we all wake up tomorrow, we will be 1 month away from the big June recruiting month. So that's something to look forward to. And hopefully when we wake up tomorrow, Jim will have internet back, and you guys who don't have power will have power back, and everything will be heading back toward something approaching normal. But thanks to everybody who had comments and questions tonight. It's fun as always. We missed Jim for sure, but I don't, I can carry I can float the boat on my own or drive the ship or whatever you want to call it every now and then by myself. It's not the end of the world. So we used to do it all the time before we brought Jim in, and hopefully we'll have Jim back again next week. But thanks everybody for comments and questions tonight. It was a lot of fun. There's still time to get in questions for the mailbag, which will be on Friday. So make sure you go to Panther-Lair.com and post your questions there. We'll answer as many as we can in Friday's morning pit. And in the meantime, like this video and subscribe, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. That way you never miss any of our pit video content. Thanks so much for tuning in tonight. I hope you've had a great week so far. Enjoy your what's left of your Wednesday. And we'll catch up with you tomorrow morning for the morning pit right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.